Good morning, my friends. I am Reverend Elisha Christopher. I'm a they. And my ancestors on my mother's side come from Austria and Holland. And my ancestors on my father's side come from Scotland and Ireland. And I did a little family research, and I just think this is kind of a fun little fact. The Hayden name, which is my family last name, comes from the Hedon Valley in Scotland, and is where the word hedonism comes from. So when you hear the church refer to the heathens, it was my people they were talking about. I kind of love that. So if you will, let's begin with a few breaths. Exhale first, and take a deep breath in. And let go. Another deep breath in. And let go. One more. Breathe in. And let go. And so, this week we are diving into our year of inner and outer permaculture, and our theme for January is the principle observe and interact. It's the first principle of permaculture. It's also, I think, the first principle of science of mind. It's the first principle of mindfulness, the first principle of spirituality, right? Is observe and interact. That there is observation necessary before action. And I think this is a fundamental and simple principle, but it's something that gets overlooked a lot. And we're going to start with a quote. I've been doing a lot of research on permaculture in the last couple weeks, and I'm going to read you this from someone named Tim Sonder from a website called edibleevanston.org. And he's talking about the principle of observe and interact, and he says, although observation seems obvious, it's often the step that is left out of the equation when we start a project. The world around us is full of examples of people acting without having really observed how the sun moves, how water flows, how the wind blows. We have to know how nature works if we want to be able to work with it. When you take time to slow down and simply observe something, a plot of land, a group dynamic in your office, or in your chicken flock, it gives you time to reflect on what is actually happening right in front of you. This gives you information that can then be useful as you move forward in creating better, more efficient, and abundant designs for living. Just observing makes nothing happen. Just acting can make problems bigger and bigger. We need to balance the two. And I think that this quote is incredibly relevant to the world that we live in. You know, this idea that we see a lot of people, especially in spiritual communities, doing a lot of observing with very little action. Right? We sit on our meditation cushions, we think about our thoughts, we make our vision boards, we observe, and sometimes it goes nowhere. And then we see the other half of the world, the not-so-spiritual world, who just seems to be acting without much observation, and with very little bridging of the two. And in the principles of permaculture, observe and interact is incredibly important when you enter into a new space. If you enter into a new space, perhaps you want to spend a year and learn how the patterns of the sun are. Look where the shady spots are. Where are the wet spots? Where are the dry spots? Where are things growing easily? Where are things struggling? And then you use that information to then start to make a plan about what it is that you want to do that will work in harmony with the system that's already there. And the modern mind, the colonial mind, often says, I'm going to go into a space, I'm going to impose my will upon it. We're going to strip down everything that's here and start over again and build what we want, with very little observation or consideration of the flow of nature and energy. And we in Science of Mind talk about our lives as being about working with spiritual principle. And this philosophy of new thought that's been around for 150-something years was really founded on the original founders of this movement, people with fabulous names like Phineas Parkhurst Quimby and Mary Baker Eddy. and Emma Curtis Hopkins, and others and others and others that lead to Ernest Holmes. This philosophy was founded on the idea that there is a connection between the mind and the body. That what manifests in the body could be a manifestation of what's happening in the mind. And that the power of the mind has to heal over physical conditions. And that a shift in thought, a shift in consciousness can change a physical symptom. But also, thoughts can land in the body and create illness or sickness. That's kind of the basis of this philosophy, where it started. And when I first came to New Thought, I was introduced to a book by Louise Hay that I'm sure many of you have seen or heard of, called You Can Heal Your Body. And this was a big bestseller in probably the 60s or 70s in New Thought. And it's this little compendium that you can look up any part of the body, any symptom in the body, and it will give you the metaphysical translation, the metaphor of what that's all about. And so your back is about support. Your feet are about moving forward. Your eyes are about vision. Your lungs are about inspiration, right? That there's metaphors in the body and in the affairs of the mind, and that these two things are connected. Well, this also created sort of, I think, a problem in the New Thought communities, because what happens then is that this thinking then says, well, you're responsible if you have cancer, or you're responsible if you stub your toe, or what were you thinking that caused that cold to happen? And I don't think that's the point. I think we miss something. This is a guide of how to observe and interact. That if something manifests in your body, it's like a check engine light in your vehicle. If something shows up, it's an indicator light that says, hey, maybe here's a place you might want to look in your thinking. Maybe here's a place that you might want to look at the beliefs that you have. And this body of work was incredibly powerful to the gay community during the AIDS epidemic. Louise Hay and her Hay Rides, she was a superstar in the gay community, because she brought this body of work and said, it's not just your thinking. The world has told you that you're a disease, that something's wrong with you, and that your adoption of that belief is manifesting in your community, in your body. It's not your thinking. It's the thinking in which you're swimming that is creating. And so this can give us a little indicator of where to look, right? And so we've had this in our philosophy for a long time. And the thing is I think that there's incredible power in this lens of observe and interact through metaphor. And that we can use this same idea to then recognize that it's the thinking and this relationship to the body and manifestation. We can use that same lens to then look out at the world. That what we see in the environment, what's happening in our collective, is then a manifestation of what's happening in the collective mind. And do we do this sort of analysis of observation and interaction, or do we just sit and observe, or do we just act? Right? And I think I read this to y'all probably a year or so ago at the beginning of the pandemic. And there was something that was going around the internet for a while, and this is a bit long, but I think it's important because it really hits our purpose here. And this was written by someone online, and it was going around a number of social media sites, and it's called An Imaginary Letter from COVID-19 to Humans. Okay? So again, think about this idea. That what we think, what we do, our beliefs, the atmosphere in which we swim is manifest as physical conditions, like Louise Hay tells us. But it's not just in our bodies. It's the whole system. So COVID-19 says to humans, stop. Just stop. It is no longer a request. It is a mandate. We will help you. We will bring the supersonic high-speed merry-go-round to a halt. We will stop the planes, the trains, the schools, the malls, the meetings. The frenetic, furried rush of illusions and obligations that keep you from hearing our single shared heartbeat. The way we breathe together in unison, Our obligation is to each other, as it always has been, even though you have forgotten. We will interrupt this broadcast, the endless, cacophonous broadcast of divisions and distractions, to bring you this long breaking news. We are not well. None of us. All of us are suffering. Last year, remember this is 2020, last year the firestorms that scorched the lungs of the earth did not give you pause. Nor the typhoons in Africa, China, or Japan, nor the fevered climates in Japan or India. You have not been listening. Is it hard to listen when you're so busy all the time? Hustling to uphold the comforts and conveniences that scaffold your lives? But the foundation is giving way, buckling under the weight of your needs and desires. We will help you. We'll bring the firestorms to your body. We'll bring the fever to your body. We'll bring the burning, searing, and flooding to your lungs, so that you might hear, we are not well. Despite what you think or feel, we are not the enemy. We are a messenger. We are an ally. We are a balancing force. We are asking you to stop, to be still, to listen, to move beyond your individual concerns and consider the concerns of all, to be with your ignorance, to find your humility, to relinquish your thinking minds and travel deep into the mind of heart, to look up into the sky, streaked with fewer planes, and see it, to notice its condition. Is it clear, smoky, smoggy, rainy? How much do you need it to be healthy so that you may also be healthy? To look at a tree and see it is to notice its condition. How does its health contribute to the health of the sky, to the air that you need to be healthy? To visit a river and see it, to notice its condition, clear, clean, murky, polluted? How much do you need it to be healthy so that you may also be healthy? How does its health contribute to the health of a tree who contributes to the health of the sky so that you may also be healthy? Many are afraid now. Do not demonize your fear, and also do not let it rule you. Instead, let it speak to you in your stillness. Listen for its wisdom. What might it be telling you about what is at work, at issue, at risk, beyond the threats of personal illness and inconvenience? As the health of a tree, a river, the sky tells you about the quality of your own health. What might the quality of your health tell you about the quality of the health of the rivers, the trees, the sky, and all of us who share this planet with you? Stop. Notice if you're resisting. Notice what you are resisting. Ask why. Stop. Just stop. Be still. Listen. Ask us, what might we teach you about illness and healing, and about what may be required so that all may be well? We will help you if you listen. Now, can you see how that letter is a perfect example of how our thinking, our perceptions, our beliefs, our behaviors, our choices are manifesting not only in the world but also in our bodies? That what Louise Hay is talking about, and you can heal your body, and what this individual is talking about in this imagined letter from COVID-19, these are the same principle at work. This is new thought, right? And a little while ago, Ron and Marianne gave me a book called Inflamed. It is the deep medicine of anatomy and injustice. And this is this on a global scale. This book talks about all of the issues that are happening in our world and in our environment and relates them to systems of the body. And so it talks about issues of the blood and talks about the issues of salmon and rivers. It talks about the issues of deforestation and the loss of the flora and fauna in our guts. It talks about the pollution of the air and the fact that we've been screaming, "I can't breathe," for years now. Right? These are not metaphors. Think about this, that as COVID-19 rose up into the world's consciousness, the murder of George Floyd happened, that there are people dying in hospitals on ventilators and people marching in the streets saying, "I can't breathe." This is the planet crying out through humanity that we are being suffocated by our way of being. That there is a manifestation happening in our collective body, in the body of the earth, and in many of our physical bodies. And it's not just our individual thinking anymore. It's that we're part of a global collective. And that we need to begin to navigate in a new way. And this idea of observe and interact, I think, is the fundamental principle. That we have this philosophy. We've been teaching what Louise Hay's been teaching for 30 or 40 years. And yet how many of us have taken that same mentality and then looked out into the world and saw the fevered climate and then saw COVID and said, "Wait a minute, the fever's coming into our bodies. These things are not unrelated." If we actually want to emerge towards this vision of a world that works for all, we have to begin to navigate the world that is, observe what is, and then begin to make the necessary shifts and changes. You know, in Louise Hay's book, she says, if there's this condition in your body, begin to use this affirmation or this mantra. Begin to shift what you're focusing on. Begin to change the interaction based on the observation. Notice something first, and then figure out how it needs to be different. We are in the most interesting of times, right? And we got here from a whole lot of action without the observation. With a whole hundreds of years of colonialism has been about just imposing will onto the other without acknowledging the impact, without acknowledging the struggle, without acknowledging the damage. We've known, scientists have been screaming about global warming since the 70s. And we have just continued to act and act and act and not shift based on that observation. If we truly saw what was happening around us and then used the power of our minds to actually think about it all, to look at how it's reflecting back to us, and then begin to figure out what we can do to move forward, that's the kind of spirituality in action that we're trying to wake up here. Because spirituality that just leads us to observation isn't going to get us anywhere if we don't do the next step. Quantum physics will tell us that observation is interaction, but we'll get to that in a couple weeks. Because there's something there for us as well, right? But it's the observer who is the one who's making choices in the universe. That we have to observe. And I hear a lot of people in spiritual community say, "Oh, I don't watch the news. I don't want to hear about that. It's negative." If you're not observing, how can you know how to interact? We have to observe our inner world. We also have to observe the outer world. How often do we act in ways with other people, whether they be students or partners or family members, and then reflect on ourselves and say, "Ooh, I probably could have done that a little differently." Right? Many of us know people who don't do that reflection and who are blindly smearing their stuff all over you and me and everywhere. It's everywhere right now. Because there's this disconnect between what we see and where we want to go. And I had this vision in my head the other day that what we've all been trained to, the world that we live in, the 9 to 5, go to your job for 40 years and then retire, that whole thing is just about follow a straight line. Just be an arrow and just go through whatever needs to happen so you can just get through it. And then I sort of saw this sort of a thing, right? Where we make a motion and then we kind of have to spiral around what just happened before we move on to the next thing. And there's this kind of activity of spiraling back around, of observing and then interacting again, observing and interacting, observing and interacting. And it's that kind of creative feedback loop that I think can move us forward in ways that just trying to bulldoze forward, it's going to get us places we couldn't have imagined. Because if we just want to impose our will on things, each one of our individual creativity is only so much. If we want to work with the powers of the universe, the power of the collective, it involves us having to slow down a little bit and take some notes. Pay a little bit more attention. I know many people who have interacted with our modern medical system in some way. Many of you are in this room. And we live in a society that often again, even our doctors just want to act, to intervene, as opposed to observing and testing and looking. And, I know someone who was given a medication many years ago for something that had devastating effects on their body and found out that they just had a food allergy. Had the doctor observed and interacted and helped them find out what's causing the problem, things could have been very different. But instead, we just act. Well, here's the prescription. This is how we solve this problem. As opposed to looking back to the causes, to the roots of things. And we're living in a world where there's all kinds of symptoms coming up. And I think when we see all of the problems of the world, the thing we want to do is put out fires. We just want to act, make it all stop. As opposed to stepping back, maybe watching it burn for a little bit, and trying to figure out where the source of the fire is coming from. Because we can just keep putting out the little fires, or we can really figure out what's causing all of this. And science of mind, first principle is that mind is cause. Chaplain Cheryl, we're in a mastermind group, and I hear her say all the time, the issue's not the issue. Whatever you see, whatever you think you see, whatever problem needs to be put, that's actually not the thing. There's something underneath it. But if we just want to run in and put it out, we may not see that there's something underneath. I have a friend who did a disaster training a number of years ago. And the first rule that they learned, don't just do something, stand there. When you run into an emergency situation, whether it's a car crash or a plane crash, do not just run in and start doing things. Walk into the situation and pause. Observe as many details as you can. Figure out who is in most urgent need of triage. Look at who else is taking care of what, and then step into where you're most needed. Don't just do something, stand there, and then do something. But we have to take that momentary pause first, to look within, to reflect, to do the observation, to make the necessary analysis, and then take the steps that are necessary to work towards the healing. And so that is what we're doing here. Each week we're going to explore this concept a little bit more. Next week we're going to start talking about the observing and interacting that's going on in here. and how we take all this that we're seeing in our body and in the world and really look at the observation and the interaction that takes place within the mind. And so if you will, take a deep breath in and let go. I'm going to invite the ministers and practitioners to stand if you're in the room and take another deep breath. And so as we breathe this morning, my friends, let us just be first in this awareness that there is only one of us here. That there is indeed one seamless presence that is living and breathing throughout the entirety of the universe. And it is this one who is observing and interacting with itself through each one of us. That each one of our eyes, each one of our lives is the place where the universe, where the Spirit of the living God is observing its own creation. And then through our choice, through our participation in life, the interaction happens. And so let each one of us recognize that we are on a spiritual journey of evolution, of emergence, of continuously becoming something more. And that we are a people who are continuously seeking to be more mindful, to be more conscious, to be more aware not only of ourselves, but how we fit into the grand scheme of things. Remembering that we are so deeply interconnected, not only with each other, but indeed with all life on earth. That there is one body, the body of the earth. And that we can use the principles and the awareness that we all know, that is awakening within each one of us, to see that there is an interconnectedness between our bodies and the world. And that what is happening out there is happening in here, and what's happening in here is happening out there. That there's no space in between, because it's all interconnected. And so we are stepping into a deeper methodology of thriving, learning how to live in harmony with nature and tend to the garden of our own lives. Because each one of us has something that is waiting to bloom and blossom and come forward. And together we can awaken our own spiritual magnificence and bring forth a world that truly works. And we're going to build it right here in this place, starting with each one of us. And so let us just be in celebration and in gratitude of the opportunity to be in co-creation together. Always remembering that there is a force of evolution, that there is a power for good greater than we are, that there is something beyond us that calls us forward. And so let us listen. Let us observe and interact on purpose. And so it is. Thank you.